Hi there, and welcome back to the Foundation Presents. I'm your host, Mike Schramm, a board member for the Foundation for West Hartford Public Schools, a private nonprofit organization that seeks to support educational projects, programs, and initiatives that enhance and enliven the classroom experience for all West Hartford Public School students. I'm joined today by Dr. Roszena Haskins, who is the Director of Equity Advancement for the West Hartford Public Schools. I'm very excited for this conversation. Dr. Haskins serves as the Director of Equity Advancement for the West Hartford Public Schools. Her experiences as a special education teacher, middle school principal, district-wide administrator, and higher education instructor have broadened her understanding of the pre-K to post-secondary landscape of public education and life outcomes. Her vision for equity, diversity, and inclusion sparks her passion for social justice. Dr. Haskins is committed to building equitable and culturally responsive schools and community systems that clear paths for all students. Dr. Haskins, thank you so much for joining me today for what should be a very stimulating conversation. So to start off, can you tell me a bit about your work as the Director of Equity Advancement for the West Hartford Public Schools and your team's work a little more broadly?
Sure. Well, good morning, and thank you, Mike, and the Foundation. Thank you for hosting us and allowing us to share with the public our district's equity-focused work. So the role of the director in the Office of Equity Advancement really touches across all building levels in all areas, essentially, of district operations, programs, policies, and practice. And although this position is it's not situated within a school, it's probably farthest from the classroom, our deep equity-focused work really shows evidence of direct impact in the classroom, in schools, and throughout the community. We subscribe to the motto, clear paths, bright futures, and no limits, excuse me, for all students. And so what that means is we're trying to ensure equitable access opportunities for all, regardless of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, where students sleep at night, who they live with, and who they love. So in order for us to ensure access and opportunities, we have continuously, excuse me, we have to continuously assess for potential barriers and strategically create pathways and even new opportunities for students. And sometimes we realize that these are the barriers that can adversely impact how our families engage in our schools. So there are 4 major aspects of our equity work, which includes focus on high quality pedagogy, culturally relevant pedagogy. What we teach is as important as how we teach. We want to ensure that students' identities, experiences, and narratives are seen and felt in the context of teaching and learning. And so that requires instructional materials and resource adoption with a cultural competence lens. Social emotional wellness is another aspect of building equitable schools. We've adopted the greeting of the African Maasai, which is Kaseri and Ngera, and how are the children? And the response in English is all of the children are well, and that's what we want for our children. So we're working to build skills and competencies within our students and within ourselves as adults to really cultivate a set of skills of personal self-concept, showing empathy, self-regulation, and having a sense of belonging and responsibility in diverse community settings. So culturally responsive conditions and practice are like really critical aspects of the work. And one example of that is educator diversity. So it's the recruitment, retention of a diverse workforce. And that's what we believe that all children need and deserve. And most importantly, is the family and community partnership. We really value our parents as shoulder partners in education. And so the homeschool partnership really allows us to access these funds of knowledge that families possess and the cultural assets that support student learning both in school and at home. And, as you know, like no one can do all of this work alone. And so I am fortunate to have many, many change agents in this work And here in the district, we have an active Equity and Diversity Council and an LGBT plus alliance in which all of our schools are represented across all disciplines and all pulling on the same rope to move the needle.
Wow, what I'm hearing in all of this is really trying to have a deep understanding of the students that we're serving in the West Hartford Public Schools and meeting them with curriculum that speaks to who they are, who their teachers are, in a way that sort of acknowledges the importance of who people are, and making sure that we represent as many different voices as possible. And I'm particularly interested in some of what you just said about the diversity within the educators in the West Hartford Public School. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you have expanded the diversity within the teacher pool in the schools, and maybe is there any kind of professional development angle to that?
Sure. We are always trying to explore and utilize new ways to get prospective educators of color excited about working in our district. The teacher diversity shortage isn't unique to West Hartford, but we're not waiting for that type to change. There's clearly a leaky pipeline in the system. And the teacher diversity workforce. And so we know that getting highly qualified educators of color that represent the makeup of our student body and this, or the rich diversity that we see in our classroom, we know that that is critical, but keeping them is also crucial. So one strategy that is showing really promising early signs of hope and growth is our high school future educators of diversity program. And it is a grow your own pipeline program, which has been supported by the foundation. And it is an early recruitment and training program for high school students who aspire to become educators. And through local partnerships with local colleges and universities, we're able to proactively identify those barriers that I mentioned in the beginning, that we see in at secondary school and post-secondary barriers that students may encounter, and then providing mentoring, supports, navigation tools, and encouragement to be on that pathway to teaching. So one final thing I'll say about that program is there's an incentive, and that's when they complete all of their teacher education requirements, they're guaranteed an interview within our district. And these young scholars, they will have the highest priority among our extensive competitive candidate pool that we see every year. You mentioned professional learning, and that's a huge part of the retention of our teachers and educators of diversity. Professional learning in our district focuses on how to teach and support not only diverse learners, but developing skills and dispositions within our educators that they need to teach within diverse settings. And so it's important for our students to feel valued, seen, and heard, but it's also important to us that our educators feel that way too. And so one of the ways that we build capacity really is by making space for multiple stakeholder groups to have a seat and contribute their perspectives and ideas to help us to really challenge the status quo.
Wow, I love that program. I'm not sure how many of our viewers are totally familiar with it, but I think what you're getting at here is building a community, and having that community be made up of students, of teachers, of parents, of administrators who are working in town hall and executing all of these plans that happen in the 17 schools within the West Hartford Public School system. And I think we hear a lot, we hear more about this lately, the importance of building a community and the power of community. But this feels like such a real tangible example of the necessity for building a community that acknowledges people and who they are and where they come from, and also acknowledges where we want the community to be. I particularly love the idea of students coming through the West Hartford Public School system and then coming back as educators, which we know happens, but to have a concerted focus on that feels so incredibly powerful and meaningful in speaking to students and telling them that they matter, their education matters, and their ability to affect the broader community matters.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, our students, they know that West Hartford is a great place to live and learn. And so we're really trying to show them that it's also a great place to work and grow. And so they're having common experiences right along with us in building our capacity for cultural competence. And they're giving us their feedback, and we're hearing their voices too.
Well, so speaking of hearing students' voices, the last year has been very profound for very many different reasons, but most particularly in hearing the voices of students and community members in response to the country's ongoing reckoning with racial justice, in particular sparked by George Floyd's murder this past summer in Minneapolis. Can you speak a little bit about how you and your team have responded to students raising their voices, in some cases demanding to be heard?
I'm glad you raised that question, Mike. The jury selection, as you know, right now is underway for the George Floyd murder indictment, and it is no doubt right now a trigger for many of us. And so in asking me specifically about George Floyd and naming him, I think it is safe to say that last spring, most of us were coping, processing, or grieving in our own ways. And so for many people of color like myself, it was yet another deep and traumatic act of dehumanization. And so what followed here in our community, we saw were protests and unrest. And we knew that as a district, we needed to more boldly and loudly denounce racism. And we really needed to renew cause for racial justice. So our schools took a variety of leader-supported intentional approaches in discussing George Floyd's death, the protest movements, racism, and racial justice. And it was important to us to find time for check-ins with students and for adults, despite the challenges of being in that remote learning environment, right? So still as a district, along with the larger community and even our neighboring communities, we united in solidarity, and we felt it was a moral imperative to acknowledge George Floyd's death by name, as you have, and naming it as an act of racial violence. We also understood that we needed to acknowledge a range of feelings and emotions, from outrage to grief, disbelief, and to validate those feelings. And then we proceeded to make a commitment to not retreat to silence, and to make a promise, a solemn promise, to challenge the status quo and to work in service of equity by being actively anti-racist. Because it's so easy for us to slump back into our old ways of thinking and believing and doing. And as the sun is coming and spring is coming, the climate, it's easy to become complacent again. And so we wanted to keep the energy, the commitment, and the conversations alive. So we developed the vision statement for equity and anti-racism, for which our board of ed fully supports and officially adopted in the fall, to frame and drive our work, and to really commit to continuous improvement. We made a statement, we released a commitment statement for equity and anti-racism, and it acknowledges our shortcomings, not all of them, but also recognizes or highlights some of the work that we have been doing, which we're talking about today, but not to say that, it's great, it's totally effective, but it does honor the hard work of our educators and our community partners. And it gives context where we have been, but we also recognize it's not enough. So we commit to a set of actions, and that is to be actively anti-racist. And so we initiated a plan in partnership with parents to develop teaching and learning classroom experiences, just so that they could have these sensitive but necessary conversations with students. And we were intentional in our outreach and inclusion of our BIPOC families, who are often most underrepresented, and we want just to ensure multiple perspectives were heard. You know, so more specifically, that plan was implementing a district-wide pre-K through 12 curricula, if you will. It's social emotional learning, SEL, instruction paired with social justice education. And these are guaranteed classroom experience. They're intended to help our students and adults build self-awareness, manage emotions, and strengthen relationships with others. We also draw upon a set of standards by Teaching Tolerance, which is by the Southern Poverty Law Center as our framework. And those domains are, those standards are within the domains of identity, diversity, action, and justice. And so those are our levers towards social justice and, you know, social emotional learning in our district. And a lot of the materials that we were able to access and purchase was supported through the foundation, very print, digital rich, culturally diverse and relevant instructional materials.
You know, again, I'm picking up so much on the theme of building and strengthening the community within the West Hartford Public Schools. And I so appreciate what you're saying about reaching out to students to provide social emotional learning, so that we're acknowledging that students experience things that happen in the world, and education is more than just memorizing sets of facts and figures, but about building citizens, building members of a community, and also what you touched on in terms of reaching out to families, and specifically BIPOC families within the West Hartford Public Schools, the need to connect with families that may not have always historically felt very connected to by administrators and leaders within the West Hartford Public Schools, but to make a concerted effort to acknowledge the importance of doing that. I so appreciate that work. And you've mentioned sort of the foundation's support for some of this. I can share that over the past summer, in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the uprisings all across the country, the foundation board, which typically does not meet over the summer, came together multiple times to have conversations about what can we do. We must do something, because as you said, it's so easy to be complacent and to sort of boil things down to what we as individuals do or do not do. But there is power in collective action. And this past summer, the foundation, in a very strange time otherwise, in terms of what would happen in the schools, we made a commitment that we've called our equity grant to provide funding for you and your team and your efforts, really to support the excellent work that you're doing. Can you speak a little bit to how this grant has affected you and your team and your work?
So again, yeah, I think the being able to access a more robust resources, instructional materials at all, building reading levels, making them accessible to our students, that really has leveraged us a lot, so that we can really focus and invest on quality teacher professional development, professional learning, helping teachers to utilize those resources in ways that are authentic. And so at one particular project or grant supported effort that has shown great success, and we're going to continue it. It's a great model, and even well beyond, COVID times and virtual learning, we're going to continue this model. And that project is the family art culture. It's a family paint night, art night. And so that was a project that the foundation supported, and it aimed to connect with and engage our secondary students in the remote learning experience school, and to partner with parents to learn about their culture, history, experiences, narratives through art, and in a synchronous virtual environment. And so bringing people in where they live, where they are, and in their settings where they're comfortable. And whether you're, a visual artist, or you're a reluctant artist, or a hidden artist, come. And so there were channels. We were trying to channel that inner artist in everybody, but essentially we wanted to foster that feeling of connectedness, and feeling valued, and feeling seen, and feeling safe. And so we, not just for the benefit of the remote learners and their families, but also for the wider community to be able to learn about each other's cultures and gain appreciation for each other and visual art products too. And so, there were so many rich cultural stories that were shared, very powerful. And I think there's a lot to be said for storytelling and how we learn about each other when we find out that we have more in common than we have differences. And so we also thought it'd be great for the community to experience art too, by having it digitally displayed throughout the community and as we explore cultures.
Now, again, sort of getting back to that theme of building community, and speaking as a person who is not very artistically talented, I know that these paint nights are a lot easier than they may seem at the outset. But I really, again, I love the idea of building community, and this work can at times be difficult and painful, and it is not always, though. It can be fun, it can be joyful, it can be something that we can all revel in and celebrate together. And I know I am hoping to have a conversation with the two educators who led that paint night. So teasing that for our viewers for hopefully our next episode of the Foundation Presents. In our last few moments here, Dr. Haskins, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to communicate to our viewers? Again, speaking about the importance of your work and the ongoing nature of it.
I think I'm channeling an educator, the late Rita Pearson, and a quote that just will always resonate with me. And it is, every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best they possibly can be. I think I'm quoting her correctly, she's been a champion for children and for educators too. And so we just call on the community to continue to learn about and support our work, and give us feedback and be partners in building a more equitable community at large. And so we love these opportunities to talk about our work, to be asked about our work, and to extend our reach into the greater community, and especially amongst community members and stakeholders who have commonly felt unheard. We need ways to draw them into and engage them, and let them know that they are important to us.
I couldn't agree more. One of the most important aspects of strengthening a community, in my mind, is expanding the definition of the community, is expanding the tent, and bringing as many people into the community as possible. And that work must be done intentionally. It is not something that can be done passively. I so appreciate hearing what you and your team are doing in the West Hartford Public Schools. I certainly think they are better off for your work. On behalf of the foundation, I thank you for doing everything that you do. And for our viewers, if you'd like to learn more, you can visit the foundation's website, fwhps.org. We have lots of information about the equity grant there. Roszena, I don't know if there are resources that you can point our viewers to on your website or other virtual platforms.
Yes, absolutely. West Hartford Public Schools, WHPS.org /EDC, WHPS.org/EDC.
There you have it, folks. Well, Dr. Haskins, thank you so much for your time today. I so appreciate it. And good luck with the rest of the school year and beyond.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you to the foundation, and have a great spring. Be well and be safe.